In the quiet valley of Ibumba, life moved to the rhythm of water. Every drop mattered, every stream had a name, and every well was more than a source of life. It was a doorway to the unseen. The villagers believed that the spirit of the deep, called Mama Kanu, watched over them through the waters. Each morning women gathered at the central well, singing songs of gratitude, tossing in petals of hibiscus and crushed kola nut as offerings. It was said that when the wind rippled the surface, the spirit was listening, and when the water stilled, she was asleep. No one dared to speak harshly or spill blood near the well, for fear that Mama Kanu's slumber might turn into rage. Ibumba was a place of order, where everyone knew their place and kept their faith in balance with the mysteries that ruled them. Children grew up hearing tales of those who mocked the spirits, farmers who took too much water and returned to find their crops blackened, hunters who washed their bloodied hands in the well and were never seen again. These stories were passed down not as threats but as truths, woven into lullabies and rituals. The villagers spoke of the well as if it breathed. On nights when the moon was full, they swore the water hummed softly, echoing the heartbeats of the people it sustained. Life in Ibumba was both beautiful and bound by invisible chains of belief. The market thrived with laughter, but even joy had rules. Drums could not be played after dusk near the well, and no one was allowed to draw water during storms. Elders said the thunder was the spirit's voice and lightning her eyes. Anyone who disturbed her when she spoke risked becoming her echo forever. These superstitions had become law, shaping lives as firmly as the chisel shapes stone. Yet beneath that peace was an undercurrent of fear, an awareness that the spirit's protection was fragile, that one wrong act could shatter the balance between the living and the depths. The people of Ibumba had long forgotten when the first well was dug, only that it was blessed by a wandering priestess who vanished into the forest afterward. Every generation built a shrine around it, layering it with offerings and prayers. Clay jars filled with scented oil lined its edge, and carved symbols of fish and waves decorated the stone lip. Even the chief bowed to the well before speaking in public. It was both the heart and the throat of the village. Everything flowed from it and everything could be taken back by it. But not all hearts in Ibumba were at peace. Some whispered that the well demanded too much obedience, that the fear it inspired kept the people small. The younger generation, curious and restless, sometimes lingered too long by its edge, staring into its depths as though waiting for something to stare back. And sometimes, when the air grew heavy before rain, a strange sound drifted up from the dark below, not the splash of water but a low sigh, like someone calling a name long forgotten. Those who heard it hurried home and sealed their doors. The elders said it was just the breath of Mama Kanu stirring in her dreams. But others, especially the young and daring, believed the well was not just watching, it was remembering. Ibumba's peace was delicate, held together by ritual and faith. Yet deep beneath the earth, beneath the sacred stones and whispered prayers, the water stirred with an ancient knowing. It had seen every secret, swallowed every tear, and carried every sin ever spilled into its depths. The villagers of Ibumba lived in reverence, unaware that the spirit they worshipped would soon be awakened, not by disrespect or blasphemy but by injustice. And when that moment came, when the well was forced to witness cruelty under its sacred eye, the same voice that once hummed lullabies would rise in rage, echoing through the night until even the earth remembered what the water could do. Kiana was unlike anyone in Ibumba. Where others bowed their heads in reverence, she looked at the world with wonder and asked, "Why?" Her laughter carried across the fields like morning light, soft yet stubborn, and her questions made elders frown and mothers whisper. She was 19, slender as a reed but with eyes deep as the well itself, eyes that seemed to hold both curiosity and defiance. Orphaned young, she had grown up under the care of the village women, learning kindness from those who pitied her and strength from those who envied her. Yet even without parents or privilege, Kiana carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who belonged to something greater than fear. Every dawn, she walked barefoot to the sacred well, a woven basket balanced on her hip. She sang as she went, songs her mother had once hummed, songs no one had taught her but that lived inside her like an inheritance. The villagers said that when Kiana sang, the wind paused to listen, and the ripples in the well smoothed as though her voice soothed the spirit beneath. Children followed her sometimes, laughing and splashing in her shadow, and she would turn, smiling, saying, "Do not fear the water, it listens to love." But to the elders her words sounded dangerous, too bold, too free. "The well is not a friend," they would warn. "It gives when it chooses. Do not charm what you do not understand." Still, Kiana's songs continued. Some nights, when the moon hung low and the air was thick with crickets, she would sit by the well alone, humming softly. She spoke to it like one might speak to a sleeping companion, telling it her dreams, her questions, her grief. If the spirits live here, she would whisper, then they must be lonely. The water seemed to shimmer in response, and though she never admitted it aloud, Kiana felt as though something listened back. She dreamed often of the well, of a voice in the deep calling her name, not in warning but in welcome. Her kindness made her beloved among the poor. She mended torn garments, shared her food, and cared for the sick when others feared contagion. Even the beggars by the market said she had a heart made of rain. Yet her compassion also drew suspicion. She speaks too freely, muttered the chief's wife. She forgets her place. And the priest of the shrine, an old man named Duma, saw her gift as both a blessing and a threat. The spirits favor her voice, he admitted to the council, but favor can turn to fury if she oversteps. Kiana, however, was not one to be silenced by fear. She loved the stories of the old days but wanted to understand them, to see beyond the veil of superstition. If the water can bless, she once asked, why can't it forgive? No one answered her. Some elders spat on the ground, calling her arrogant. Others avoided her entirely, muttering that she would bring change, and change in Ibumba was the same as trouble. Despite the whispers, Kiana's spirit never dimmed. She dreamed of leaving Ibumba one day, of seeing rivers that met the sea, of a world where no one lived in fear of their gods. Yet something held her close, the feeling that the well was watching her, that it knew her name too well to let her go. On certain nights, when she stood near its edge, she would see her reflection shimmer and shift, not her face but something ancient and vast staring back. It frightened her, yet she could not look away. People began to say strange things, that the well's surface glowed when she approached, that her shadow lingered in the water even after she walked away. Some called her blessed, others whispered she was marked. But Kiana paid them no mind. To her, kindness was prayer and her song was freedom. Still, in the quiet hours when the wind stopped and the air grew still, she sometimes felt a tremor beneath her feet, as though the water below was restless, waiting, listening, remembering. She could not know that her voice, the same voice that calmed the well, would one day awaken it. Nor could she foresee that her compassion, her questions, and her refusal to bow to fear would test the very faith that held her village together. In Ibumba, water was life, but for Kiana, it was also destiny, and soon both would meet in a way that would make the earth tremble and the sky remember her name. Zubri was the kind of man whose footsteps made others clear the path. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in fine woven cloth dyed with the colors of status, deep red and gold, he carried the confidence of someone who had never known the word no. As the chief's only son, his future was certain. He would inherit the lands, the cattle, and the voice that decided who lived in honor and who was cast into shame. Yet, for all his privilege, there was one thing he could not command, Kiana's heart. The first time he noticed her, she was drawing water from the sacred well, sunlight dancing across her arms as she sang softly to herself. The air around her seemed to still, the ripples of the well reflecting her song like it was part of her. Zubri stopped in his tracks, caught between fascination and confusion. He had seen many beautiful women in Ibumba, but none who carried herself with such quiet strength, none who seemed untouched by fear or greed. From that moment he wanted her, not out of love but possession. He began finding excuses to visit her part of the village, pretending to inspect the market or deliver orders from his father. Each time he tried to charm her with small gifts, a silk scarf, a bracelet of cowrie shells, a pouch of sweet dates. Kiana always thanked him with grace but never wore his gifts. "I have no need for things that weigh the heart," she once said with a polite smile. Zubri's pride flinched, but he mistook her calm for shyness. One evening, under the fading glow of sunset, he approached her near the well. "Kiana," he said, lowering his voice to something he thought sounded tender, "you should not have to work so hard. You belong in the chief's house, where your beauty will be honored." Kiana laughed softly, not out of mockery but disbelief. "And what would I do there, Zubri? Sing when you command me? Bow when your pride feels hungry?" Her words struck him harder than a spear. "You insult me," he snapped. "No," she replied calmly, "I only refuse to be bought." It was the first time anyone had spoken to him that way without fear. The rejection burned deeper than he expected. Pride twisted in his chest, turning admiration into resentment. "You think too highly of yourself, Kiana," he hissed. "A girl with no family, no land, no dowry. You should be grateful anyone would look your way." Her eyes did not waver. "And yet I am not," she said simply. That night, Zubri could not sleep. Her voice, her defiance, replayed in his mind until it turned to fury. He told himself she had embarrassed him before the spirits, before the ancestors, before himself. He drank palm wine until dawn, swearing that he would make her regret it. But beneath the anger was something darker, a wounded ego that confused desire with ownership. Days passed and Zubri's pursuit grew more aggressive. He followed her in the market, spoke her name in the gatherings, and even sent word to the elders, suggesting that a girl so defiant might be dangerous. Rumors began to grow, whispers that Kiana's songs were spells, that her kindness was a mask. The same people who once praised her voice now crossed the road when she passed. Kiana felt the weight of the change but refused to let fear silence her. Zubri watched the shift with satisfaction, thinking it would break her spirit, but it didn't. If anything, it made her stronger, her songs deeper and sadder, echoing through the fields like a prayer for truth. His anger simmered into obsession. He visited the shrine and asked the priest Duma for guidance, but the old man only said, "The spirits bless humility, not hunger." That answer enraged him even more. In his bitterness, Zubri began to weave lies, that Kiana spoke with the spirit of the well at night, that her songs called storms, that she had cursed the crops. And though the elders had no proof, fear is a language people understand too easily. The village began to doubt her purity, their faith twisting under the shadow of his words. Zubri told himself he did it to protect the village, but deep down he knew the truth. He wanted her punished for saying no. He wanted to see her bend, to erase the strength in her gaze that had made him feel small. And so, a seed of vengeance took root in his heart, one that would soon poison not just Kiana's fate, but the peace of the entire village. For in Ibumba, where water carried the memory of every word and every sin, vengeance was never buried quietly. The well listened as it always did, and the ripples in its depths began to tremble with a whisper that would not be silenced. As the blazing sun rose each morning over the cracked earth of Ibumba, the air hung heavy with despair. The once lively songs of the women at the well had faded into silence. Dust replaced dew, and the sacred well, once the heart of the village, echoed with emptiness. The drought had begun as a whisper of worry but soon grew into a storm of fear. Crops withered, goats bleated weakly, and even the trees seemed to bow in exhaustion. The villagers gathered daily before the well, praying, pleading, and weeping for rain. Their cracked lips uttered the same desperate words, "Spirits of the deep, forgive us." But the water never stirred. As the weeks passed, murmurs began to spread. Someone must have angered the spirits. Someone must have broken the balance between humans and the well. And into that silence slithered Zubri's voice. He spoke softly at first, pretending sorrow and concern. The drought began, he told the elders, on the day Kiana sang at the well. She sang without the ritual, without offering the calabash. The spirits do not forgive arrogance. The old men frowned, uncertain. Kiana was known for her kindness, her compassion. But fear makes hearts weak and memories short. The people wanted a reason, someone to blame. Zubri fed their hunger with whispers dressed as truth. She mocked the sacred songs, he insisted. She believes her voice controls the water itself. One by one heads nodded. Doubt began to settle like dust in every home. Mothers pulled their children away when Kiana passed by. Old friends stopped answering her greetings. Even her songs, once a source of joy, became symbols of danger. At first, Kiana tried to ignore the shifting gazes. She continued helping the weak and tending to the sick. But she could feel the weight of judgment pressing on her shoulders. One evening, as she fetched water, she noticed children throwing pebbles near her feet and whispering, "Which of the well?" Her heart cracked. That night, a council was called. The elders sat in a circle beneath the withered baobab tree, their faces shadowed by flickering torches. Zubri stood among them, his expression grave but his eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. "She must answer," said the oldest elder. "The spirits are angry. The water has not risen for moons. Someone has broken the harmony." Kiana was brought before them. Her wrists trembled, not from guilt but disbelief. "I have done no harm," she said, her voice steady yet fragile. "I have only sung to the water as I always have. My songs are prayers, not curses." "Then why does the well sleep?" Zubri countered. His tone was sharp, cold. "Since you began your singing, the rains have fled. Even the wind avoids your name." The crowd murmured in agreement. Fear had taken hold, reason no longer mattered. Kiana's mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Please," she begged the council. "She is only a girl. She would never defy the spirits." But the elders had already decided. They needed peace, or at least the illusion of it. "Until the water returns," the chief declared, "Kiana will bear the weight of our repentance." The words struck like thunder. Kiana fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "You cannot," she whispered. "You all know me. You have shared my songs, my food. I have never." "Enough!" The chief's staff struck the ground. "You will not speak against the will of the ancestors." The villagers turned away as she was dragged toward the sacred well, her cries echoing through the dry night. Even her mother dared not speak again. Only the wind seemed to listen as Kiana's voice cracked into a sob. Zubri watched from a distance, his jaw set and eyes cold. In the faint torchlight, he whispered to himself, "Let the water choose who is pure." And as the first ropes were tied, as Kiana's wrists bled beneath the strain, the well seemed to shudder in the moonlight, as if something ancient stirred in its depths, waiting. The drought had found its sacrifice. But the spirits of Ibumba had not spoken their final word. The night fell heavy over Ibumba, pressing against the huts like a living thing. No crickets sang. No dogs barked. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The entire village had gathered in a ring of flickering torchlight around the sacred well, a wide, ancient mouth of stone that had once sung with the laughter of children and the echo of water buckets. Now it stood silent, a black wound in the center of the earth. Kiana was brought forth, her wrists bound in thick rope, her feet dragging against the dust. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. Faces she had once known, the women she had helped fetch water, the men she had shared stories with, now looked at her as if she were something unholy. Some avoided her gaze entirely, others clutched charms and whispered prayers. The chief stood at the front, his expression grim. His son, Zubri, lingered beside him, eyes glinting like a predator in the firelight. The elder priest, wrapped in robes of faded red and cowrie shells, raised a hand and began to chant in the old tongue, a language said to belong to the spirits beneath the well. "Tonight," the priest proclaimed, his voice rising above the crackle of torches, "the waters will hear our plea. The drought shall end if the curse is lifted. Let the one who angered the deep be given back to it." A low murmur swept through the villagers. Some wept. Some nodded solemnly. No one dared object. Kiana lifted her chin, her tears catching the torchlight. "You are wrong," she said softly. "I never cursed the water. I sang to it, like my mother and her mother before her. The well knows my heart." The priest ignored her words. "Bind her," he ordered. Two men stepped forward hesitantly. They were young, barely older than Kiana, and their hands trembled as they took hold of the iron chains. The sound of the metal scraping against the stones echoed through the silence. Kiana looked to the sky one last time. The stars were veiled by clouds as if even the heavens refused to watch. "Spirits of Ibumba," she whispered, "if I have done wrong, take my breath. But if my heart is clean, let the water remember my name." Zubri smirked faintly, though he could not meet her eyes. For a fleeting moment, guilt flickered within him, but pride quickly buried it. He had convinced himself this was justice, not vengeance. The chains were wrapped around her wrists and ankles, their cold bite searing her skin. The priest murmured another chant, dipping a calabash into the dry air as if it held invisible water. "By the will of the ancestors," he said solemnly, "you are bound beneath the spirit's gaze." The chief hesitated, his voice low. "Let it be done." The crowd parted as they led Kiana to the edge of the well. Its darkness seemed endless. Even the torches could not touch the depths. The villagers believed the well was not just stone and water, it was a living spirit, one that could whisper or rage. Kiana peered into it and felt a strange calm. The air rising from the mouth was cool, almost comforting. She remembered the days she had sung here as a child, her voice echoing against the walls. The well had always answered her with ripples and gentle sounds as though it listened. Now it waited in silence. The priest nodded, and the men began lowering her slowly by the chains. The iron links groaned. The crowd gasped as she disappeared inch by inch into the blackness. The only sound was the hollow clink of metal against stone. Halfway down, Kiana began to sing. It was not a cry of fear, but a lullaby, the same song her mother had sung when the rains came after her birth. Her voice rose soft and haunting, echoing through the well like a spirit's breath. "Water of life, remember my name. When silence falls and none remain. If hearts betray, if voices die. Let truth awake where shadows lie." The words drifted upward, brushing the ears of every villager. Some turned away, tears in their eyes. Others crossed themselves in fear. The priest tightened his jaw. "Seal it," he commanded. With a heavy wooden lid carved with sacred markings, they covered the mouth of the well. The sound of the chain settling was the last they heard of Kiana. The torches flickered, and for a brief moment the ground seemed to sigh. The ceremony was done. One by one the villagers dispersed, leaving behind only the chief, the priest, and Zuberi. The night grew colder, the silence thicker. "She has paid the price," said the priest, clutching his beads. "The spirits will forgive." But the chief stared at the well, unease in his eyes. "Why do I still hear her song?" Zuberi looked down, forcing a smirk. "It is only the wind, father." Yet even as they turned away, the faintest melody drifted up from the sealed well, soft, mournful, and clear. It was Kiana's voice carried through the stones. And with it came the sound of a single drop of water falling. Though the drought had not yet ended, the well had begun to whisper. The night of her sacrifice had barely passed when Ibumba was shaken awake by something it had never known before, the sound of screaming water. The air was heavy, thick with unease. The moon hid behind clouds, and the stars seemed to have fled the sky. The villagers, exhausted from their rituals, slept restlessly in their huts. But as the clock of the night neared midnight, the ground beneath them began to hum, a deep, throbbing vibration that rose from the earth's belly. At first it was faint, like a whisper through the soil. Pots rattled, goats bleated, and dogs whimpered into the darkness. Then came the sound. A low moan, watery, gurgling, and pained, seeping up from the sacred well. Old Mama Kofi, who lived closest to the well, sat upright on her mat, her wrinkled hands trembling. She listened. Another sound followed, louder this time. A deep splash, then a violent one, and then a scream. It was not human nor entirely spirit, but something between. It seemed to rise from both water and air, splitting the silence like a blade. The sound rippled through every hut, every beating heart. Children woke crying, clutching their mothers. Men stumbled out with torches, faces pale and uncertain. "The well," someone shouted. "The well is crying." Dozens rushed toward it, their flames flickering wildly in the wind. The earth trembled beneath their feet. When they reached the sacred circle, they froze. The ground around the well was wet, though no rain had fallen. Water oozed through the cracks of the stones, bubbling as if boiling from within. The lid, sealed tightly with sacred rope, began to pulse. Thud, thud, thud. Each beat sounded like a heart trying to break free. The priest, who had led Kiana's chaining, pushed through the crowd, his ceremonial beads clutched tight. "Do not go near it," he shouted. "The spirit is restless. Stay back." But the villagers could not look away. The water spilled over the rim now, not clear but cloudy, churning with force. And as it surged, voices emerged within the roar, dozens, hundreds, all crying out one name. Kiana. It echoed in waves, Kiana, 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 until even the night seemed to breathe her name. Some fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the mud. Others fled, screaming that the dead had risen. In the chief's compound at the far end of the village, Zuberi woke with a start. His chest pounded. The sound of the screaming water reached him even there, distant yet distinct. His mother ran into the room, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. "Zuberi," she gasped, "what have you done?" "The water calls the girl." He tried to steady his breath. "It's just the wind, mother." The people panic easily. But his voice trembled. He remembered Kiana's last words, "Let the water remember my name." The chief entered moments later, his face pale. "This is no wind," he said. "The spirits are angry. You said she was the cause of the drought, Zuberi, but perhaps it was our cruelty they wanted to punish." Zuberi looked away, guilt slicing through him like a knife. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky though there were no clouds to birth it. The earth shivered once more, and from the direction of the well came a blinding shimmer of blue light, like lightning trapped in water. The villagers screamed and scattered, but some stood frozen in awe. The well had burst open, its lid thrown into the air with a mighty crash. Water poured out in torrents, flooding the dry earth, soaking the ground that had been barren for months. But with the water came the sound, that same dreadful scream, shaped now like a voice both furious and mournful. Mama Kofi, shaking, whispered, "It's her. The girl. She sings through the water." And indeed, beneath the roar, a melody began, faint, haunting, rising and falling like waves. It was Kiana's song. "Water of life, remember my name. When silence falls and none remain." The priest fell to his knees, his beads scattering into the mud. The offering was wrong. He cried. "We've angered the spirit of purity. The water mourns her." The water surged higher, spilling through the village paths, seeping into homes. Cattle broke free from their pens, and the villagers wailed as sacred symbols carved on their doors began to wash away. Zuberi, drenched and trembling, stumbled toward the well with a torch in hand. "Kiana!" he shouted into the chaos. "Stop this madness." But the water hissed, extinguishing his flame instantly. He fell backward as steam rose from the ground. The air carried her voice, no longer gentle but filled with sorrow and power. "You bound me beneath silence," the voice seemed to say, rippling through the air. "Now I rise through every drop that bears my name." Lightning flashed, not from the sky but from within the well itself, and for a brief moment the villagers saw something form in the water. A shape, a woman's face, eyes open, hair floating like a crown. "Kiana," someone whispered. Her image dissolved, but her voice did not fade. The screaming grew sharper, blending with the roar of water, filling the night until it was unbearable. Even the strongest men covered their ears. Babies wailed. Animals fled. The whole of Ibumba seemed to pulse with her anguish. As the night bled toward dawn, the earth finally began to calm. The roaring softened into a murmur, the light dimmed, and the flood receded into the well as though it had never been. When the first rays of sun touched the soaked village, the people stepped outside cautiously. The air was fresh, cool, and from the well came the sound of gentle dripping. The drought was over. Pools of clean water glittered across the land. But none celebrated. For in every drop that fell back into the earth, they still heard her voice, faint, echoing, and eternal. It whispered one thing only: "Kiana." Dawn crept over Ibumba, but it was no dawn of peace. The night's screaming had faded, yet the silence that followed was even heavier, the kind that pressed against every chest, thick and alive. A strange mist hung over the village, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and something else, metallic, sharp, like rust. When the villagers gathered near the sacred well, they froze in horror. The water, once clear and sacred, now shimmered dark red under the rising sun. It wasn't just tinted, it bled. Slowly, a murmur spread among the crowd, trembling voices rising into panic. "The well bleeds," whispered a young mother, clutching her child. "The spirit is angry." The priest stepped forward, his robe soaked from the night before, his beads clinking nervously. "Stay back," he commanded, though his voice wavered. He peered into the well and his breath caught. Floating atop the crimson water were the chains, Kiana's chains, broken and glistening. They rose and fell with the ripples, shining like snakes made of sorrow. But there was no body. "She's gone," someone whispered. "The girl's spirit, it has escaped." Zuberi stood among the crowd, his face pale, his eyes hollow. His heart pounded painfully. "She can't be gone," he muttered, stepping forward. "I saw her chained." His words died in his throat when a sudden gust of wind swept across the clearing. It carried with it a sound, faint, melodic, heart-stopping. The song. Soft, sorrowful, and familiar. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, from the air, from the water, from the soil beneath their feet. Every ear in Ibumba caught it, every heart recognized the voice. Kiana. Her melody floated through the wind like a warning wrapped in beauty. Children began to cry. Old women clutched their amulets, murmuring prayers. Even the birds seemed to stop mid-flight, circling above the well but never daring to land. The chief arrived with his guards, his face gray with sleeplessness. "What has happened now?" he demanded, though fear cracked his voice. The priest turned to him, trembling. "She has been taken by the spirit of the water. The sacrifice has been rejected. The well cries not for forgiveness, but for justice." The chief's jaw tightened, but his eyes darted to Zuberi. The unspoken truth hung between them. This curse had been born from Zuberi's spite. That morning the villagers tried to fetch water, but every bucket came up red. Those who dared touch it screamed, claiming it burned their skin like fire. The crops, still damp from the flood, began to wilt as the sun rose higher. Their leaves curled inward, their roots blackened. By noon the once green fields around Ibumba had turned gray and dry. The river that fed them slowed to a crawl, its surface swirling with faint traces of crimson. "She's punishing us," whispered Mama Kofi, clutching her shawl. "The girl's spirit has bound the land." The villagers knelt in the dirt, wailing for mercy. They lit candles, offered sacrifices of goats and grain, but the well rejected everything. Every drop of milk they poured and curdled. Every prayer echoed back as if mocked by the wind. At the edge of the village, Zuberi watched in silence, tormented. The sound of her song haunted him wherever he went. At night, he heard her whisper through the rustling grass, her melody weaving around his thoughts. The water remembers. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. The guilt gnawed at him like hunger. He saw her face in reflections, not only in water but in mirrors, in windows, even in his dreams. Her eyes were calm, but her mouth always moved with the same unending song. The chief summoned the priest again. "We must undo this curse," he ordered. "Tell the spirits we will do whatever they demand." The priest shook his head. "This curse is not of the spirits. It is of blood and betrayal. It cannot be undone by sacrifice, only by repentance." The chief grew angry. Then who should repent? The priest turned his eyes toward Zuberi. The room went cold. Zuberi clenched his fists, his pride battling with the truth clawing at his chest. "You blame me?" he shouted. "You think I control the spirits?" But even as he spoke, the wind began to hum again, faint but clear, that same melody that had never stopped since dawn. Every hut, every corner of the village seemed to hum with it now. The people pressed their hands to their ears, weeping. The song echoed from the ground itself, like the soil was alive with her voice. By evening, strange things began to happen. The wells in nearby villages, miles away, started to sing too. Travelers whispered that they heard a woman's voice humming from rivers, from clay pots filled with water, even from the rain itself. Ibumba had become cursed. Wherever the name Kiana was spoken, the air trembled. As night approached, Zuberi wandered back to the well. The moon reflected on the red surface, shimmering like blood under silver light. The broken chains floated gently, clinking softly with each small ripple. He fell to his knees. "Kiana," he whispered, his voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" "From us." The water rippled in response. The reflection shifted. For a heartbeat he thought he saw her face. Come. Distant. Her lips moved, forming words he could not hear. Then the wind answered for her, carrying her melody once more. "The water remembers, the water repays." Zuberi screamed and fled into the darkness. Behind him, the well bubbled violently. The chains sank beneath the surface again, as if dragged down by unseen hands. The red hue deepened until the water turned nearly black. And far across the land, wells began to overflow, not with water but with voices. Whispering. Singing. Mourning. By dawn of the next day the drought had ended, but the people of Ibumba would soon wish it hadn't. For the rain that fell was not clean. It was dark, heavy, and it carried her name in every drop. Kiana had become part of the water, and now every river, every stream, every drop that touched the earth carried her curse. Zuberi no longer slept. Every time he closed his eyes, her song returned, soft at first, then piercing, echoing through his skull until he woke screaming. What began as a whisper in the night had grown into a constant torment. The voice of Kiana filled every space around him. It slipped beneath doors, rose from cups of water, and even vibrated through the ground when he walked. He would press his hands over his ears, but the sound only grew louder inside him. "Stop it!" he cried into the empty room one night, knocking over a jug that spilled across the floor. The spilled water rippled and shimmered in the moonlight, and for a heartbeat her reflection appeared in it, eyes calm, lips moving in rhythm to her endless song. Zuberi screamed and smashed the jug. From the next room his father, Chief Dalu, listened. The once mighty leader sat in silence, his face sunken, his robes torn. Since the well had turned red, the village's wealth had withered. Their herds were dead, the crops were dust, and their trade partners refused to come near Ibumba. The chief's storehouses were empty, and his people had begun to whisper that the curse would not end until the guilty paid their debt. At first he had sent offerings, white goats, ivory, gold. None were accepted. Each sacrifice vanished into the well without a ripple, and the song only grew louder. Now his own guards refused to meet his gaze. Mothers turned away when he passed. Even the priest, his most loyal advisor, avoided him. That morning the villagers gathered before the chief's hut. They were hollow-eyed and trembling from hunger, yet their voices were strong. "Chief Dalu," an old woman said, stepping forward with a cracked walking stick. "The water spirits cry for justice. We all know whose blood must answer." Dalu rose slowly, his bones aching under the weight of her words. "You dare accuse your chief?" But the crowd did not flinch. Their eyes burned with the fury of loss. "We dare because the land dies with us," another man said. "We watched the innocent chained and we stayed silent. But now the spirits demand truth." Zuberi pushed through the crowd, his hair wild, his eyes bloodshot. "No," he shouted. "It was me. I told them she angered the well." A murmur ran through the villagers. Even his father stared at him in disbelief. "I wanted her to fear me," Zuberi continued, his voice cracking. "She refused me and I He fell to his knees, clutching his head. I hear her every moment. She won't stop singing. He looked up, tears streaking his face. Please, Father, make it stop. The priest stepped forward, his voice grave. There is only one way. The spirits demand a ritual of atonement. The guilty must face the water and confess before the well. The chief's lips tightened. If I allow that, my son will die. The priest met his gaze. If you don't, the whole village will. That night, the air grew heavy as torches were lit and the people of Ibumba marched toward the sacred well. The song already waited for them, faint but clear in the wind. Kiana's voice guided their steps, sorrowful and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. Zuberi stumbled between guards, his wrists bound. His father followed behind, walking as though every step drained the life from him. The villagers surrounded them in a wide circle, whispering prayers for forgiveness. When they reached the well, the priest raised his staff. This is the night of reckoning, he said. Let truth cleanse the water. The moon shone white on the surface of the well, and for the first time since Kiana's death, the water was calm. Zuberi fell to his knees beside it. Kiana, he whispered, his voice trembling, I was jealous. I wanted you to love me, and when you didn't, I let my pride destroy you. I chained you when you only sang for peace. His tears fell into the well, making small ripples. Forgive me. The crowd waited, breathless. For a moment there was only silence. Then, slowly, the water began to stir. It shimmered faintly, silver and red, and the reflection of a young woman appeared on the surface. Her face was calm, her eyes deep as the riverbed. Her lips parted. A faint hum filled the air. The song that had haunted the village shifted, no longer one of anger but of sorrow and release. Zuberi wept, bowing his head. Thank you, he whispered. But then the ground shook. The priest cried out as the well began to bubble violently. The reflection twisted. The water surged upward, wrapping around Zuberi's legs like living chains. He screamed as it dragged him down. The villagers backed away in terror as the well swallowed him whole. When it was over, the water stilled again, clear for the first time in weeks. The chief fell to his knees, broken. She has taken my son, he murmured. The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. No, chief. She has taken justice. But the punishment was not yet complete. That night, the chief's hut caught fire without cause. Flames rose silently, consuming everything he owned, yet the wind carried no smoke. When the villagers rushed to help, they found the chief kneeling within the ashes, whispering her name until his last breath. By dawn, Ibumba was quiet again. The curse began to lift, the crops stirred with life, the rivers ran clear, and the wind no longer sang with sorrow. Yet the villagers never forgot what they had witnessed. And though the water now sparkled under the sun, those who listened closely swore they could still hear, deep beneath the surface, a single haunting voice humming softly. The water remembers. The water forgives. But never forgets. The rains began as a whisper, soft, uncertain, and hesitant, before swelling into a melody that wrapped around the village of Ibumba like forgiveness. The elders stood around the sacred well, their trembling voices weaving through the thick air as they sang the ancient hymn of cleansing. Their chants carried sorrow, regret, and prayer, a plea to the spirits for mercy. The sky darkened above them, not with anger this time but with promise. The scent of wet earth mixed with the smoke of burning herbs, and for the first time in months, the wind did not feel dry and punishing. The well, once a symbol of fear and silence, began to shimmer with a faint blue light. The glow spread outward like ripples, illuminating faces carved with shame and grief. The water moved as if alive, responding to the voices that once condemned and betrayed. Then, without warning, the surface broke open, not violently but gracefully, and from its depths rose Kiana's spirit. She appeared not as a ghost of vengeance, but as something pure, radiant, and sorrowful. Her eyes reflected both pain and peace, and her form seemed woven from water and moonlight. The villagers fell to their knees. Even Zuberi, hollow-eyed and trembling, could not look away. The chief clutched his staff, tears streaking his face, his voice breaking as he whispered her name. Kiana. Her gaze moved over the crowd, lingering on those who had wronged her, the elders who condemned, the villagers who obeyed, the men who tightened her chains. Yet there was no fury in her face. Only an unbearable sadness that spoke louder than any curse. When she opened her mouth, her song rose, soft and echoing through the wind, the same melody she had sung on the night of her sacrifice. But this time it was not a promise of vengeance, it was a farewell to pain. The rain fell harder, drenching the villagers as if washing their sins into the earth. Children ran into the open, laughing through tears, tasting the sky's forgiveness. Women lifted their hands, feeling life return to the land. The fields began to darken with moisture, and seeds buried months ago stirred awake beneath the soil. Zuberi fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. He tried to reach out, but the spirit shook her head gently. "You took from me what was never yours," her voice echoed, not in anger but in truth. "But I forgive you because the water that once carried my name carries peace again." Then she turned toward the well, her form beginning to dissolve into mist. Her song softened until it became part of the falling rain, the final note lingering in the hearts of everyone present. When the last echo faded, the blue glow dimmed, leaving behind clear living water that shimmered with purity. The chief rose slowly, aged by guilt and humbled by loss. "Let this well never again be used for punishment," he declared, his voice trembling. "Let it stand as a reminder that the spirits do not thirst for blood, but for truth." The elders nodded, tears mingling with the rain. That night, the village gathered under a sky cleansed of drought and despair. They lit no torches, for the stars shone brighter than they had in years. The children told stories of Kiana, the girl whose song calmed the waters, whose kindness survived chains, whose forgiveness brought life back to Ibumba. And as the people slept, lulled by the rhythm of the rain, the well hummed faintly, not in pain but in harmony. The curse had lifted. The water had returned. And so had Kiana's peace. Generations passed, and the story of Kiana faded from memory, but never from the soul of Ibumba. The droughts ended, the harvest returned, and the village grew strong again, yet beneath every drop of water that touched the soil, her spirit lingered. The sacred well, once a place of sacrifice and sorrow, became a shrine, not to fear but to truth and compassion. Every morning, women came to draw water, bowing their heads before lowering their clay pots. They whispered prayers of gratitude to Kiana, the girl whose voice had calmed the angry spirits. Flowers were left at the edge of the well, bright marigolds and white lilies, as tokens of remembrance. The air around it always felt cooler, gentler, as if the water carried her breath. At night, when the moon hung full and silver above Ibumba, the elders gathered the children by the fire and told her story. Once, they would begin, there was a girl whose heart was purer than rain, but whose truth frightened those who clung to fear. The children listened wide-eyed, clutching each other as the tale unfolded. The drought, the chains, the screaming water, and finally, the forgiving spirit that turned pain into rain. Mothers taught their daughters the lesson of Kiana's courage, to speak gently but never to silence their truth. Fathers told their sons of Zuberi's downfall, of how pride, when left unchecked, could poison a soul faster than thirst. And as the fire crackled, every voice softened when they reached the story's end. "Never chain innocence," the elders would whisper, "for the water remembers." Over time, the well became more than a shrine. It became a place of judgment and renewal. When disputes arose among villagers, they met by its edge to seek honesty, believing that lies could not stand before the spirit of the water. When babies were born, their mothers sprinkled the first handful of water from the well over their heads, saying, "Let your heart be as pure as Kiana's song." When someone died, a small cup of the well's water was poured onto their grave, a final blessing connecting every life to the girl who had once been chained beneath it. Travelers came from far lands to see the well of Ibumba, to listen for the voice said to rise when the night was quiet and the wind gentle. Some claimed they heard her name carried softly through the reeds, others swore they felt her presence in the cool mist that drifted above the surface. Scholars wrote of her as legend, poets sang of her as love, and mystics prayed to her as a guardian of the pure-hearted. But for the villagers, Kiana was never just a legend, she was a reminder that truth, once drowned, will always rise again. And sometimes, when the moonlight shimmered across the water, an unseen ripple would spread outward, as though unseen fingers touched its surface, and a faint melody would hum through the air, low, haunting, and beautiful. The children would hush, clutching their blankets, eyes wide in wonder. "Is that her?" they'd whisper. And the elders would smile gently. "Yes," they'd say. "The water still sings her name." The people of Ibumba learned to live with gratitude and reverence, for their wells no longer screamed, they sang. And whenever the wind brushed across the land, bending the grass and rustling the trees, it carried a sound so soft yet so sure that even the earth seemed to listen. It was the echo of forgiveness, the memory of courage, and the eternal truth of Kiana's song, the song of the girl who turned chains into rain and silence into legend.